panelists today. We've got Keith Fear. Keith Fear runs one of the largest balloon companies in the United States, all over Florida and St. Louis and a bunch of different states. And they have a lot of different operations, but he pretty much takes over the whole southeast of the United States. We've got Sheldon. Sheldon, you guys have probably seen photos and videos of him flying off of the only private aircraft carrier in the United States. So in Lake Tahoe there, which is damn cool. And we all wish that we had our own aircraft carrier and we're as cool as Sheldon. And then we've got Jeff Snyder from Above Reality up in Vermont, who Jeff and I have had a lot of extensive conversations around drop lines too. But these are kind of some of the best commercial pilots and people who've been flying for a long time to learn from. And I'm really excited. So we're going to start how tonight will go is it's going to be in a couple different sections. First, we're going to talk extensively about drop lines. We're going to show a lot of videos, some that are terrifying about drop lines, when we should be dropping them, when we shouldn't be dropping them, you know, drop lines getting stuck, releasing them, working with your crew. We'll also be talking about just landing in general and dealing with crews so that we don't have issues this year. And we'll be showing some fascinating videos of those too. And then lastly, we'll be talking about a couple things with tie-offs as well. So, because that's the other thing where always people run into issues there. And we want to make sure that there's a bunch of different types of tie-offs and things to really look out for. So if you guys do have questions or comments, please put comments in the chat. We all read those and comment on them. Anyone can comment on those. And if you do have a question you want anonymously to ask, feel free to do that in the question. So without further ado, we're going to start off with Jeff Snyder. Jeff, we've had a ton of conversations about drop lines for probably hours, you and I. If you want to kind of start us off, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, thanks for all the ego-inflating introductions for all of us here. They're probably too kind, but thank you for taking the time to host these and spending your time and energy, Eliab. I think it's a great service to a lot of people. Is the audio good?
Great.
Cool. So, yeah, to start with, generally up here in the Northeast, I use drop lines for really a couple of main reasons. The first one I'd call maybe braking, slowing down, or stopping. You could argue that those might be convenience methods. I sometimes use it at slower speeds to maneuver or sort of cheat over a tree line or to a more advantageous or easier retrieval site. And I've also been known on occasion to use them as what I refer to as the Hail Mary, where you fling that drop line over the side and you know that 150-foot strap probably is not getting anywhere close to the ground, but when your crew arrives, they'll offer whatever assistance, and if not, you can cut it away. So that's kind of the reasons why I use them. And so if you want, I can start with the basics, and you can kind of control that if you think it's too basic or not. Okay, I didn't get your audio, but
oh, sorry, now I can hear you. So with in general with drop lines, I think for me that there's a couple of things I always run into. One is like, well, when am I actually supposed to drop them? And I always try to throw it really far, but I found I really suck at throwing them far, right? I don't know if maybe someone else is better at that. And then also dealing with, you know, sometimes being pulled down by them, or dealing with my crew of what's going to happen to the balloon in different situations, and how I'm supposed to talk to my crew to make sure I don't slam into the ground over and over.
Yeah, well, in terms of throwing it, I don't think that's you. I think that's all of us. I've always said probably the strongest guy out there, or the best ultimate Frisbee player, can probably only throw a drop line about 15 feet. And usually it's about half that for most of us. So I usually try to look down, straight down the scuff leather, and sort of just look at a teeny tiny bit to see how far I think I can throw it. But even before I throw it, probably more importantly, what I do is when and where I hook it up, which I think is important to do at the beginning of the flight rather than at the end. So I try to do that when there is no pressure as towards the end of the flight. So in the first 15 to 30 minutes of the flight, I'll often get my drop line out, make sure it's hooked up to my quick release, and then also make sure I set it in a particular location on a tank. Sometimes after, if I've emptied a tank and I know I no longer need that tank, I'll set the drop line specifically on that tank to where it can't fall down in between two tanks and I can't reach it. And I set it in the shortest distance over the side. So when everything is processing in my head at the very end of the flight, I don't have to think about where it exits the balloon. It exits out of the closest place to it, which prevents it from getting wrapped around even just an upright, which I've done. I have wrapped them around fuel hoses, thankfully with no adverse effects. One time I have an iPad in flight, and I had routed it underneath the iPad mount on the RAM mount, and it flung the iPad off from about 40 feet. Shout out to Otterbox. That thing lived on a grass field. So the first thing I do before I even think about throwing it is I think about how to hook it up correctly. And of course, in each balloon, you'll hook that up in a similar location to where you tie off to. And I don't know how maybe, Eliab, you do it, or Sheldon, I don't know if you're maybe throwing in a more routine fashion from a boat if you're using them there. So maybe you have one permanently rigged. I don't know. So if someone else wants to talk about how they rig theirs or whatever.
Well, quick question real quick. Do you use a strap or do you use like an actual rope? I don't really like straps for the drop line because I've had people cut themselves when they try to grab it, even with gloves on and stuff sometimes. But I don't use one on the boat itself. I have one hooked up in case I'd ever need one, but I don't ever use one on the boat. The boat kind of just comes to me, So.
I had only ever personally used straps, and I don't handle them without gloves. And usually the code to me if we're coming in and we're using a drop line, our radio signal is when I say gloves on and I'd like you on the ground, that's code for do not touch this if you don't have gloves on. I have used ropes. I was a little paranoid they were going to get tangled, but I had to borrow one once from someone in Mexico. Actually, Tommy Cedarland he's from Colorado, whatever. He had loaned me a rope in a bag, and it worked wonders. So I do use a webbing strap. Just whatever Paul Stump sells is what I use with a carabiner and a quick release.
Yeah, one of the things that I hear you saying is quick release. I know Keith, I don't know if you had a chance to grab a quick release. Yeah. So I think this is something that's actually really, really important versus just hooking it with a random carabiner, and because there's some challenges there. So Keith, I don't know if you want to talk about that as you also show kind of the quick release and what that looks like for folks.
Yes, let me turn my virtual background off. Sorry about that, guys. It gets a little wonky. There we go. So this is what I use on most of the smaller balloons. On all the 300s and 400s, they're typically bananas, which I didn't have one to grab real quick. But all of my drop lines go on a quick release because I need to be able to get rid of them just in case. It's just as important to be able to get rid of it as it is to be able to use it, and to know when to get rid of it. You got to remember, once you throw that drop line, you got people on the other end of it. So you're responsible for what you're doing in the aircraft that you're trying to land or navigate or whatever, as well as the people on the ground that are trying to position you. So I spend a lot of time in St. Louis using drop lines, in Albuquerque and Taos and in Vegas. I don't think I've ever used a drop line. But I fly in different cities every time, and most of the time I'm in different balloons all the time. So the balloons I fly all the time typically have 2 drop lines, primary and a backup, because you never know. To Jeff's point, as soon as I take off and I'm clear and I'm at altitude, I hook that drop line up to the quick release inside the uprights so I can throw it out easy. It's on a tank. And when I throw it, if I happen to screw up and throw it in a tree, or I didn't see something in the field, my crew will let me know. They won't touch the drop line, and I just cut it away.
Keith, do you can I ask you, Keith, do you have a release command, or do you just do it? And I'm not saying do you do it to your crew unwittingly, because we try to have you're laughing because you probably know what I'm talking about. We have a release command, which is basically where I look back over my shoulder and yell release or let go. Yeah. And I tell guys, I said, when I say that, it means I've seen something, and you have about half a second to 3 seconds before I'm releasing it, because for whatever reason, and if they're still hanging on, as you said, I feel responsible because I am the PIC and they're at the other end of that. And I know when you release that, if they're still hanging on under tension, they're going ass over tea kettle on that.
Yeah, I yell drop, and if I yell drop, they let go of the drop line, and it just goes where it's going.
I think one of the questions that, Keith, if you could show it one more time, people wanted to just see that quickly so they could actually see it one more time.
In my case, this one's an old snap shackle like they used to complain about people using for tie-offs. I use all rope tie-offs or figure eights, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But a great use for those snap shackles is for a drop line release.
I agree. Yeah.
So one of the things that I know comes up a lot is, so you drop this drop line out to the guys.
Yep.
What's kind of, for those of us who don't drop lines a lot, or maybe some of the younger pilots, what are you telling your crew necessarily to do or not do that has had adverse effects for you guys over the years?
So I can tell you, for me, drop line usage starts like right now for this flying season, even though we're grounded. We'll go out in the field and we'll practice with a drop line, and I'll teach all the new crew members I have for the year what we do on a drop line. Their technique on the drop line can make your job really easy. Poor technique on the drop line can make for a really bad day. They need to be, bunched up together so they have more leverage. You need to be able to point a direction you want them to move with the drop line and have them follow your directions, or yell at them. They need to know what you're looking for, and you need to radio to them before you get to the field that you're trying to land in, what you're expecting.
I feel like there's a lot of yelling that happens around drop lines with pilots mostly. One of the questions I had, Jeff, I know that we have a couple of videos. Was there a video that makes sense to show either the double drop line or the one with the blue balloon or the white and red one that you'd want to?
The white and blue one, you can, I don't know how the audio comes through on these, but before you play just to say.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share here.
Sure. And, Keith, we have a pretty good, not that one, the other one.
This one, not the other one?
Okay. Correct, the blue balloon.
Yep, just one sec.
And Keith, I also do a lot of prep on the radio before we come in. The crew's usually in position. And I will say, make sure everyone has their gloves on. They already all know not to wrap it. Right. That is a company policy. They know the release command. And they also know that if they let go, I tell them, I will be fine. If this balloon ends up in a tree or in the side of a mountain, I said a helicopter retrieval is about 10 grand. You're irreplaceable. Let go. So if you turn the audio up, Eliav, I think this is the one. I think you can hear me sort of, and unfortunately you can't see the final touchdown in this, but I do usually try to talk them through it to tell them. 75% break. That was before I threw it. I think it comes out right about here. It is. Takes them 3 to 6 seconds to get on it. And you can see the pendulum start there, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing to talk about too is why you kept burning there too, along with the pendulum.
Sure. And Sheldon, do you want to talk about pendulum, or I feel like you've kind of been sort of sitting there quietly, and anyone can talk about pendulum. It's pretty.
Well, I mean, we could all.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and talk about it? But I've experienced it. I'll agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the. I said, listen, I'm not smart enough to understand the full physics behind it. I just know that when you have horizontal momentum, and again, I realize there's a debate whether you should use these in slow wind or fast wind. So I'm not here to debate that.
Right.
When I use it in faster conditions, if you're moving horizontally, let's just use 10 because it's a round number. As you drop that and the crew starts to add weight on that 10 miles an hour is going to translate into a downward vertical. And so almost instantly when I throw it, I almost burn, which is of course counterintuitive because you don't want to go back up. But if you don't burn, by the time the crew starts to slow you down, you're going to be pummeled into the ground, which I have a story about that if you want, but that doesn't make me look very good. But if someone wants to learn from it, go ahead. But so that's my sort of, I call it the pendulum anchor effect, the same way a boat is sort of pulled down, and not the boat that you fly on, but maybe you can add to that, Sheldon.
I was just going to say, it's like a fulcrum. It's, the crew is the fulcrum, and they are the ones that, as soon as they grab that, it's just going to slam you into the ground. So you have to burn at that point. And if you don't, the guy that actually taught me to fly actually used drop lines all the time when we're coming in for landings at, faster speeds, which I'm not sure how I feel about that now. I think if you do it safely, it's fine. But You definitely don't want people going up with you, and you don't want to do it when you got power lines downwind of you or anything either, you know, because that can be bad. Right. But I think it's a very useful tool. But realize if you've never dropped a drop line and people grab it and you're moving, you're going to get slammed into the ground, like Jeff was saying. You know, it doesn't just gently come to the ground. You're going to be coming down quick, and you may overburn if you don't do it all the time either, too. You know, so
it's a finesse. I definitely think it's a finesse thing, especially if you're switching from, you know, I mean, I run from a 120 up to a 300, and I can tell you, and even a 54. Yeah. So I can tell you, you throw a drop line in a 54 Chariot versus a 300, you're getting two, and you have two guys on a 54 versus three guys on a 300.
Yeah,
they're night and day different. They're not even the same thing. You know, it's exponentially different.
Yeah,
you know, Sheldon, I know that we were out in Lake Havasu. You and I were out in Lake Havasu, a bunch of folks. Right. I know that when I started ballooning out here and flying over lakes, most people were like, don't fly over the lake. And then one of the other guys, Vic, he said, well, just make sure that you know what to do when a boat's pulling you. So I thought that might be an interesting time, you know, for anyone who ends up becalmed over a lake. What's that kind of experience in Havasu and the way that you deal with that to make sure that you're not getting slammed down into the water?
Well, first of all, I'd say when you're dealing with people, a boat that's trying to stop you or pull you back or whatever, make sure that they understand the whole fulcrum thing too, because the people that are there in Havasu, Gary has them all trained, and the people there, the committee there is actually training these the captains to be able to know how to pull a balloon properly. You don't just hit the gas and go for it, because it, like Jeff was saying, it just slams you into the ground or slams you in the water. So they know to just kind of ease into it. And they also, on both the balloon end and on the boat end, you don't want to permanently anchor that rope on there either, because you need to be able to break away quickly. Just like our quick releases, the boat shouldn't tie that onto itself. Otherwise, they can be pulled out of the water too if someone doesn't know how to finesse it, like Jeff was talking about either. But we have you know, pictures I've seen of Gary with his Albert balloon, and he's leaned clear over, being pulled by a boat, being pulled back a couple times and everything. And I've been way out almost to California a couple times there in Havasu, being pulled back and everything. I've never actually had to use a drop line actually on Lake Tahoe, knock on some wood somewhere here, but luckily yet, you know, but it's a lot different there. You know, my balloon is designed to be able to land back on a boat that's 120 foot long too. And if we don't line up perfectly, I just go back up again, the boat circles and we come back and everything too. So it's totally a different thing. But one of the other things I wanted to show real quick is you were talking about, you know, it goes back and forth. Should you use them on fast wind or not? I'm going to share a video here that is pretty exciting. This is a video I found a while back that I was just looking at like random videos from around the world, and this is probably one of my favorite awkward drop line situations where, and even talking to Mark West, you know, we were talking about outflow, we are talking about a lot of stuff, like people want to drop lines all the time. You have these little tiny spots. Well, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. It's always important to be piloting commands. Let's play this video and then chat about a couple things about this one in general. And this is out in Laos. So I don't know if they have balloon license out there, but we'll find out from all the videos, I assume. I don't know. All right, that's probably good for the screaming there. But if you guys want to talk about, you know, a couple things of what you saw there, why, you know, what were some things that occurred to you, and I know I showed you guys this just before we had hopped on as well.
Can I maybe comment about the use of it in a really large field like that I think some people maybe don't can take into account. In the Northeast, we have a lot of trees, we have a lot of wet fields, we have a lot of crops. And so sometimes I will use them for both a safety factor, but also for a considerate factor. Like if it's a farmer who said to me, hey, look, you can land on this field, and use this tractor path to access it. Then if I'm upwind, as most of us know, you can't walk a balloon, any balloon, into any wind more than 2 miles an hour, and you're definitely not walking a large balloon upwind. And so I'll use a drop line in the very first part of the field, and allow my crew to use that to maybe maneuver me a little bit left or right, and to slow me down so that I can hit the, if you will, the access point or the preferred point of extraction from the landowner, so that we don't upset them, damage any crops, or get stuck. So sometimes even in a massive field like that, I will use them. And, I've heard a million times, if you can't fly without a drop line, you're not a real pilot. And I always just say, oh, okay, thank you for that. And I guess I've been a fake pilot for 2 decades, and so I think that's why I sometimes use them, not only necessarily in teeny tiny precision postage stamp locations, but also sometimes in larger ones like that field there. Now, obviously, that one was, we'll say, not very well executed. But so maybe, Keith, I don't know, you talked about them in St. Louis and in Florida. I'm sure in Florida you run into some really large parcels of land and some really other smaller places or tighter places you maybe would rather not be.
Yeah, so St. Louis, we do a lot of subdivision landings, lots of cul-de-sacs, lots of smaller yards. It's just normal for us, and they love it. They have a blast. There's a lot of times I will drop a drop line just so I have positive control on the ground, to make sure that I'm not going to drift towards a house before I get to the ground or whatever. It's not necessarily for anything other than that. Most of the time I'm landing on the smart vent, so I'm stopping really quick when I get down there, but I'm not using it as a method to descend or anything like that. I'm using it to slow down, initiate the transition to landing, and keep myself positioned where I want to be in the field or the subdivision or whatever it is I'm trying to land in, just to maintain safety. That's the only reason I'm using it most of the time. I have used them, especially in the pre-smart vent days, to slow myself down, so I could get low enough I felt like my knees could take open in the Velcro top, stuff like that. But anymore, that's pretty much the reasons I use it most of the time.
So one of the other things that I think there's some other things in the video that that probably most of you guys had noticed. I know also, Tom, you said that the Kubitschek flight manual says you can only deploy it in light winds. I think those manuals are there for a reason of what we're not supposed to do and what we are supposed to do. So I think it's always important that we do look at that. As far as some of the other things you guys noticed when they landed, what were some of the other things that you saw that that the pilot may have missed, or that the passengers could have had challenges because of the way that was landed, just so of a little deeper view into that video?
No preparation of the passengers. It didn't seem like the passengers didn't know to get down, and maybe I was missing it because we're skipping in the video a little bit, but they should be prepped and be in the basket in the right landing positions before he's doing what he's doing there, pretty much, I think.
And again, you can't see what's upwind, but he should have probably been initiating that landing a lot lower for that field. Yeah. He started pretty darn high to get down into that field with all those paddy fences everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think it's always important that you think of when you're dropping that line in that field, going back to you were saying, Jeff, at the beginning of that field, not in the middle of it when you're like, oh, maybe I can get myself down. And I think for those of us who don't have quick releases on our drop lines, I know that's a change I'm going to make. I haven't had quick releases on mine. I seldom use them, and when I do, I'm going to stay on the damn ground because I'm pretty damn low, and it's just to kind of move it over a little bit. So I know that's one change that I'll be making personally. I always find that I learn 1 or 2 things in each of these that even myself where I go, hey, wow, that's something that I'm going to change. As far as I want to kind of shift a little bit, because I know that, we are doing stuff with crew that there's other things that happen, right? Besides just drop lines, right? People can get hurt on drop lines. There's people who've done stupid stuff like tying it around trees or cactuses or all kinds of random stuff of crew that's not prepared. I know one time I got dragged through a blueberry field, and I didn't know anything about drop lines yet. I was still a student pilot. I didn't know that I should have gone to the left. I didn't know that I was going to get pulled that hard, what I should be doing. But I guess what are the other things that you guys all have a ton of experience. Keith, I know you got tons of pilots. You guys all have friends who are tons of pilots. What are the things you've seen with crew that are the other situations they can get themselves in or pilot can put their crew into? And then after that, we're going to show a video of one of these pieces. But I'm just curious of your guys' stories.
Eliav, if you want me to, I can throw myself on the sword of that one. If we're here, full disclosure, talking about the stupid things we've done so that others don't make the same stupid mistakes. And as you said, you had mentioned what rules do we have? Ours are gloves on, do not wrap it around anything, let it slide through your hands, know the release command, and let it go. You will not save me. And one time before we knew that, I'd probably only been flying maybe 5 years in a 126, and I threw one into a field that we were a little lightly loaded. It was a cool fall day, and I had, I think I only had 3 crew, which is about all we had that day, but it was a fun flight. And one of those crew was a guy I had who works for the railroad, and this dude he was a hoss. I mean, he was probably 4 bills easy and rugged. I mean, he was a railroader, and he took that drop line and just wrapped it around 2 hands and literally drug himself through this field. And grass stains all over his shirt, and there was also 2 other crew people there. So that pendulum effect, I severely learned about that day. As we came in, I think a friend of mine's wife bit her lip on that because we really did punch into the ground. And so rather than, blame that on the crew guy for wrapping around his hand, I realized that was my lack of knowledge or training on that. And so, I've even said to guys, we've chalked now how to let it slide through your hands. And again, for safety reasons for the passengers, but more so for the ground crew, I said, you do not wrap that around your hands. I'm very careful too about the length of it. Probably the most terrifying part for me is the concept that there is a roll of that behind them. If you throw, say, 125 or 150 foot strap, but you're only using 70 of that, there is some webbing behind those folks. Now, if it stays in the roll, that's great because it's a lot harder to get tangled up in it. But if for some reason it's completely unraveled and they somehow got caught in it, it is theoretically possible. So for us, I just tell them, let it go. I don't care if I threw it and I release it, we will be fine. We'll manage without you. But so I would definitely say if you have never thrown one, coordinate before you throw it. You talk about a lot of yelling. We actually do minimal yelling in communication. You have a few commands and you'll probably only hear me say a handful of things. I use actually hand signals. Like if I want them to cheat me left or cheat me right, I actually don't try to yell during that. I actually try not to. I try to use hand signals, and then I might say, full brakes, more brakes, or if sometimes there's something like a house or a small sapling that I don't want to hit, I'll say ease up, and let me go out. And so there is some communication, but I try to do as much as possible before that landing moment where everything occurs, and so that it's not this chaotic. It's this really more of an organized chaos than a just straight up chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
with some structure to it.
Perfect statement. The time to make a plan for how to handle being on a drop line is not while you're on the drop line. You need to have that plan before you get to the field. The crew needs to know what to expect, so you need to have practiced it. And honestly, if I've got crew that doesn't have experience on a drop line, I won't throw the drop line. I'm not going to put them in that situation.
What are some of the other situations you guys have been with around crew, or it ended up being, ending up a possible dangerous situation where it wasn't necessarily about drop line, but something else with landing?
So my biggest concern is people getting in front of me, especially for the big balloons we fly. If you get in front of me and I'm skimming the ground and open the smart vent to stop, I'm going right over you. There is nothing I can do to stop at that point. You're going under the basket, and that never ends well. So that's my biggest fear.
Yeah,
Keith, can I ask you?
Go ahead.
Sorry, or maybe Sheldon, I'll ask you, or Keith, you, I usually talk to my crew about 180-degree radius where I don't want them, which for me, that radius is the 180-degree downwind from, say, on a ride balloon. It's generally where the seam and the leather bolster kind of meets in the center and around the front. And I am like, it is the one thing, if you want to know what will get me to yell, if someone walks in front of that, that is the one time I have no qualms about yelling. I'll usually talk to them after, but so how do you guys do that? Because I had this one guy, he was one of my right-hand people working with me for 15 years, and he would still do it in year 11, and he just, most of the time I would then I would just grab his shirt when we were maneuvering on the ground. I'd grab him by the back of the shirt and just give a little tug, and he'd instantly know. But sometimes you have these crew members that are so eager to help, and so you may have told them 1,000 times, but you still need to tell them 1,001. So I guess Keith or Sheldon, if you want to start, how do you guys deal with that to lessen that? It does occur. How do you make it occur less?
I mean, I don't think you should embarrass the person really, really bad and scream at them and belittle them or anything. But also, I think you should definitely, if you have regular crew all the time, like we do in ride balloons and everything, definitely pull them aside and talk to them and just explain it's for their safety. We don't want them to be anywhere in front of us, to the side of us or anything, because they could get killed by that. You know, we have these gigantic baskets and balloons that could do that, you know, but I mean, it happens from time to time. Most of our crew was super experienced about it, and they knew, you know, to run behind you and grab it if they needed to, whatever, but not to go up, not to let their feet leave the ground and be willing to, you know, let go if we think we're going to be going back up again. You're going to be a big bounce or something too. You know?
Speaking of that, Sheldon, I'm going to show another video, and I know that Jonathan, you know, you had said something else, apparent Clow, about, you know, I would recommend not getting on the back either, only sides, especially on a big balloon if it bounces. Really dirt. Also, crew cannot let their feet leave the ground ever. I think that's a conversation that we have to continue to have with crew. I'm going to go ahead and show this video. And again, I want to say, you know, in all these videos that we show, the goal is not to like say, oh, this person did a poor job or whatever. This is all about us learning, and we all learn from our mistakes. I mean, we've all thrown ourselves under the bus basically of our experiences and stuff we've done. I'm going to share one of my own, and in a couple minutes we talk about tie-offs, which is horrible. But let me go and show this one, because this is also one that was captured on video, but also is a, you know, where the person survived, but was also absolutely terrifying in every way. So if you haven't seen this one, this is something to show to your crew. It's a great training module.
Yeah. Now? Yeah. Now? Yep.
That's scary right there.
Yeah.
Anybody else throw up in their mouth a little bit right there?
Big belly.
Wow.
All right. So first of all, before we start talking about it, what I want to start off by saying is I want you guys, let's talk about what he did right here. Because I think we miss that a lot of times as we look at, you know, accidents or issues or things that could have been really, really horrible. What were some of the things that he did right in that situation when discovering it?
Pulled the vent line the second he heard that. The second I commend, whatever occurred up to that point, I don't care. The second that pilot learned there was a crew member, he did not care about the aircraft. He did not care about passenger enjoyment. He cared about survival of that crew member, and he started to pull immediately. So I don't care how he got into that situation. I'm not here to pass judgment. In my opinion, he did the only thing you do, and you grab red and you pull.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree too.
So, if you guys want to chat a little bit about this video of kind of, or other things that or ways you talk to your crew or other experiences that you've had, I mean, and kind of how you handle, especially Keith, you run a larger balloon company, you know, and you probably have a lot of new crew that comes on, when do you bring that up and how are you bringing that and how serious are you about it? And do you ever have people jump onto the balloons? Do you not? I know everyone's kind of different with different size balloons, but I've even seen small balloons of, two guys jump on and that bounce and they'll go back up,
Yeah, I almost always, when I'm traveling between the companies, will have crew that I'm not used to flying with all the time. When I'm in St. Louis, obviously I've got very much the same crew, but when yeah, I saw that too. When I'm working in a different city and I'm working with crew that I don't work with all the time, I try and make it a point to get with them ahead of time and kind of talk through what my plan is. When I'm coming into land, if they're in the field in front of me, I'll talk to them the entire time I'm landing. I'm going to land over by that dirt spot, just so you know, don't get in front of me. And I will constantly repeat, don't get in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, I won't tell them to put their weight on until right as I'm stopping, especially to Sheldon's point, in a big balloon. 200-pound guy jumping on the back of a 300 is not going to make a difference. I won't even know he's there.
Mm-hmm.
So. For
sure. We had an experience one time in Vegas before Keith owned the company, but when we were flying there, and one of our very experienced crew members, he was actually there before I started working in Vegas, which I'd worked there a long time, but he grabbed onto a basket with another pilot and took a ride like that video, not quite that high, but pretty high. And luckily the guy is as strong as an ox, and he just stayed on there. And he's a big guy too, but he very easily could have died from that. And both of us as the pilots afterwards had a real stern talking to the crew member and explained to him that he could have died. And, we were concerned about him, but we're also concerned about everybody else too, that whole circumstance. But, explain to them they should never, ever leave the ground. You see the balloon starting to leave the ground, you immediately let go. Even if it's just, you think you're only going to be 6 inches, let go anyway,
Yep.
Just do it.
I think that's a great.
I think that's the biggest learning there is for everyone is if telling your crew, if it's even 6 inches, you need to be off. And as pilots, we just have to be prepared for that. So either we're landing on our own and we're not using crew and we're not having them touch the basket, or they're having help either using, drop lines or being able to put weight on. It's, again, not bad to have them put weight on. It's just making sure that's important, but just don't let them come up with you.
I think I saw, Elliot, can I just say, someone just made a comment that said, I think, tippy toe, let go, which I've never heard. That's awesome.
Good idea.
I've always specifically said, if it goes above I always say, if you feel your hands go above your chest, let go, because to me, by the time your hands are about your chest, they're going to be above your head and you're already going to be off the ground. And I usually actually sort of purposely use an awkward word. I actually tell people, when your hands go above your nipples, let go, because it's a very specific thing that people can relate to. And then by the time they've heard that, their hands are likely over their head. And if I also you talked about crew positioning in a field, as we were talking about that, I often have my crew, sometimes they'll be hiding to where I can't even see them. So if we're approaching a tree line, heading from the north to the south, I will have that crew not in the middle of the field where I can see them. They are tucked back against the tree line where it would be actually impossible for me to see them. And I'll sometimes even say, hey, if you see the 2 twin pine trees that are the tallest ones, I'm like, I want you, about 100 feet to the left of those. And that way, when I clear that tree line, and if I need that drop line because that field is maybe a little shorter than I want it, where there's maybe trees at the other end, in terms of that preparation that occurs before the chaotic period, I try to give that information in advance so that they're there. And if I fly over that tree line and the crew happens to not be there, or I wasn't specific enough, then I just don't throw the drop line and we keep going. And I just tell them, I go, sorry, I go get in the vehicle, head back down this road and keep going. And so you realize, I guess, also not to commit. If you need to miss, or if it's just not convenient or it's not going to work, you don't even throw the line and you don't even attempt the landing. You just keep going.
Yeah.
So one of the, as we talk more about lines, we've talked a lot about landing. We've talked about using, drop lines. We've talked about people putting weight on the basket and some of those challenges. I think that the next natural thing to really talk about is tie-offs, because that's your other long line. And to start it off, I guess I'll share a story that right after, I'd seen a lot. I guess for my first balloon, I just had a balloon, and it was whatever tie-off came with it, which was a 3-ring circus. So if any of you guys see it, it's like 3 metal rings that have a little piece of rope in between that holds you there until you're ready and you let go of the piece of rope. On the other end, there wasn't a carabiner. There was actually just a piece of rope. And I actually did not know. Here's what I didn't know what I didn't know. I just thought, oh, I just tie that rope to the side of my truck to the little thing that you would, normally like hook out, like do a tie down, right back into a little metal thing. And I used it for 4 years that way. And then randomly, I go and get my private license. I go out to Mike Balance. I get my license. And what happens? I go back. I go to Oregon. I'm so excited. I have 2 of my friends I'm going to take flying for the first time. And what happens? It breaks while I'm putting a little bit of air in it at about 5-mile-an-hour wind. And it goes slowly scrolling down the field as I chased after my red line to pull it because that, was just flopping. So that was mine where I go, holy cow, I need a better system. And then I kept finding that I kept ending up in false lift because I was using the 3-ring where I just snap away. And I ended up in a lot of false lift situations. So I kind of switched modes. But I guess if you guys want to start off by talking about, what tie-offs you use, why you've chosen to use those tie-offs, or if you've changed over the years. And I just want to preface this with, there is no right or wrong tie-off. Everyone uses different ones based on what they like or deal with different situations. But if you guys want to share, I don't know, Sheldon, whoever wants to share first, kind of about your experience and kind of what you do.
When I'm land-based, I always use figure 8s, and honestly, on the boat in Lake Tahoe, we don't tie off, but sometimes we we're going the same speed as the wind, so we don't have any wind at all. And I mean, it's a totally different thing there. We don't tie off at all there. But when I'm land-based, I always use the figure 8 tie off that we have, and very often, most of the time, that's with Rainbow Riders when I'm flying for them or something. And they have very experienced crew. They're letting me out as I'm on the Fiesta field or whatever. I'm letting it go. One thing I think it's important, if you are using a figure 8, make sure that it's not hanging so low that it can catch on things. We've had people that the figure 8 would like hang below the bottom of the basket and would actually catch on things when you're flying over trees and those type of things. You wouldn't want to catch on anything like that. But if you guys don't know what that is, Jeff will probably explain it, or Keith will. It actually lets you out slowly, so it avoids the false lift. If you get false, there you go. Keith has one there. If you get false lift, you'll be, especially if you're in Albuquerque and you got, rows and rows of people ahead of you and everything, and there's not enough room to get off the ground. You're a big ride balloon. You're flying along, and all of a sudden you're losing altitude, and there's no way to recover from. You hit all 3 burners, and still you can't recover from it. We actually had one of our pilots flying that actually hit one of our other vans. From not being able to recover from that or anything. So the figure 8 actually will let you out slowly, so you don't get the false lift as much. So,
and just so for don't understand what a figure 8 is, it's basically like we don't have one in front of us. So basically, it's really
actually Keith does.
Like this. Oh, there you go. Keith's got one. So Keith, if you want to explain it a little bit of why you end up using that and how that kind of works in a sense, that'd be great.
So this one's actually called a rescue 8. A figure 8 has these ears cut off typically, but with a rescue 8, these ears keep the rope centered around the 8, and it makes it a whole lot easier to let you out. So the rope will maybe come up through here and over the loop so that it's coming through, around, and back out. And then what you'll do is you'll tie that off and daisy chain that. And once that's daisy chained with a loop in it, when you get ready to launch, you undo the daisy chain, and you can literally hold yourself with one hand in a lot of wind. And then you can slowly let yourself out. It'll feed out of this and drop to the ground. I've used those for quite a few years. Obviously, like everybody else on the planet, I started using snap shackles as we got into bigger balloons. That doesn't work. Even the bananas they're okay, but that's not really a good use of them, I don't think. I prefer either a rescue 8, or I've gone to an all rope tie off where I just eliminate the rescue 8 and I run the rope through the center on a double T. I'll run the rope through the center flying carabiners back to a loop tied in the rope, and then I'll do the same daisy chain and tie off, and I'll use that for launch. That way I don't have this big giant hunk of metal hanging outside the basket near my passengers. That's what I do.
Eliav, can I, Keith, are you finished on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think someone just made a comment. I think it was Marsha Tracy, who I'm sure she needs no introduction. And she mentioned using docking rope, which I believe is actually, I don't know specifically if I use docking rope, but I buy it from a sales shop or whatever you call a marine shop, because it's the highest grade rope I can get. I think it's a 3/4 or a 7/8 rope, and the break strength on it is the strongest I've found for rope that's manageable. I believe it's 15,500 pounds, which a lot of people say is way too much. But then when you start thinking about the loss of I don't know what the technical word is, when you lose the break strength because of a knot that you have in the rope, and I get eye splices. I can't think of the words when they splice an eye in there so that you don't have the knot. And then I also, like Keith, I use a rescue 8 with the ears. I know some guys don't like the ears. I do, because I think the neuroses in me likes that it's a little more, it's less likely to slip and slip over itself. And you can release that with one hand if you've doubled it back through another beaner that's in the carabiner that's in there. And again, and I don't, like you said, Eliav, I don't think there's a right or a wrong way. I think there's ways that work. Personally, I'm not for the ride balloons in any wind conditions, whether it's anything more than 5, I do not like the instantaneous release of like a 3-ring circus or a Bonanno, because then it pendulums, and I'm not sure that it necessarily, a figure 8 to me does not eliminate the false lift. What it allows me to do is gauge how much false lift I'm getting before I have to commit to letting it go. So I can actually go off, and I have about a 30-footer. And I know there's 2 schools. Some say keep it short. Some say go longer. Mine, if it swings at all, it keeps me from hitting, or less likely to hit the tie-off vehicle. And as I start to climb out, while I'm still on the rope, holding it with one hand and the other hand on the burner, it allows me to gauge the actual buoyancy of the balloon better than if you've just released it completely. So you can get to the top of that, and you get this little feel for actually how much lift you actually have versus going back down, and then you can release under control. And so you can still get a pendulum swing forward from that, but it's not quite as dramatic or as violent as I don't know what the instantaneous release does not work. I do not prefer that method of release. I understand it works for a lot of people. And again, I don't think it's wrong. It's just not what I use in a ride balloon. I've used them. I think there's some great instantaneous release ones, but I prefer the gradual friction release with using mechanical advantage.
One of the things that we'll do is I'll probably go out this week, or if someone else wants to, any of you guys want to do a quick little video of how you'd set one up. I know that when I first learned to do it, Chad Cassell, he was the one that taught me, and we did it over a little FaceTime video, and I learned how to do it, and I was like, great. This is because I was using a 150 with a 3-ring circus initially. And I was like, wow, this is not going to work real well. So learned a lot there. But I think one of the other things that, has occurred with me, and this was something that Dean had brought up, of how do you handle that at a glow versus, when you're just launching with rope length, of what you guys do to make sure that, that's not going to snap, or because that's the worst possible scenario is you're not planning on flying and it's dark. And then all of a sudden, you're, I remember seeing at Albuquerque one of the Mexican lady balloon, or one of them that ended up flying at Albuquerque. So just curious what you guys do with your tie-up line when you're doing balloon glows. Maybe it's a little windy. What is that different, or than normally how you're doing it when you're just going to fly?
I don't know about anybody else, but we'll do, like for me, I only do a few events a year, mostly local ones. If I'm just doing a glow, like at Forest Park or something, I'll have at least 2 tie-offs, carabiner to the burner frame and carabiner to the truck. So I know that part of me is not going to leave. And then I'll usually also have top tethers. If I'm planning on doing tethered rides, then I would use obviously a sliding tether rig for that. But if there's wind, I'm going to tie those basket tethers as tight as I can get them and keep them up as short as I can, and get those top tethers as tight as I can, and go from there.
One of the other things that we haven't talked about yet is where is people tied off to all kinds of interesting places. For you guys, where are other places you've seen people tie their tie-off rope to besides, you know, where have you seen them, I guess, tie them off? That's maybe a more open question.
Rope handles.
Yeah. I've seen drop lines tied off to the rope handle inside the basket. I've seen drop lines tied off to tank straps or tank collars. I've seen, you know, actual tie-offs tied to the rope handle on the basket. I've seen them tied to like the plastic bumper on the front of a car. That was exciting. I see a lot of that kind of stuff.
Back of a trailer, the other end of it, you know, and lift the trailer up. There's actually a video out there on YouTube of a big balloon lifting a 15-passenger van.
Is that in? Is that in England? Is that the one in England somewhere, Sheldon, that you're talking about?
It's actually up in Canada.
No, it's in Canada.
It's in Canada.
Okay.
But yeah.
I mean, so I always try to go to the heaviest part of the vehicle. I'm sure you guys do too. So we try to pull the truck in and tie off to the motor, to the tow hooks. We have occasionally done where it mounts in the rear with good success on like 210s and smaller. But I think there's so much, if you have, you know, any wind or even just a gust to 8 or a wind that's you know, that changes directions. It's just, there's a lot of force there. That I tried to ask a physicist once how much force was created based on the surface area of the balloon. And the answer between, if you took the weight of the balloon, the weight of the basket, the mass of the air inside of that, and then multiplied that by whatever force was of the surface area, it's insane. I mean, you see these massive container ships all the time breaking these dock lines that are this big because of wind. I mean, and, you know, so the wind has the same effect on anything it blows on. So I always go, to me, I don't go cheap on that. I'll shamelessly plug Paul Stumpf. I will ask him to, I don't care what the cost is. I think, what's Tony, he's out in Talon, Hot Air. I mean, yeah, whatever. His son, Talon, has his shop, or, you know, any repair station or manufacturer. My thought is this: whatever your tie-off costs, it's not too much, and whatever webbing or rigging you need, do not go cheap, and do not try to make that from Harbor Freight. That might work for you occasionally, but when it matters, it will fail, and even the good stuff will fail.
So I want to ask one quick question, and then we're going to finish it off with a quick fire here. But Mike Emmett, he had said, have any of you guys taken a legitimate knot tying class, or did you learn to tie knots somewhere that allows you to, you know, do some of these things for people who don't even, you know how to do a daisy chain? I know I always somehow got mine screwed up where I'd always take every loop out. Anyone got anything there? I know I learned in Boy Scouts back in the day.
I know how to tie a bowline knot and a bunch of other bad ones, but I always say a bowline will get you out of a lot. And apparently someone told me along the way, I'm tying apparently a left-handed bowline, even though I'm right-handed. I have not taken one. I've looked at a couple videos, but I use them for tow hooks. So I've become quite adept at a bowline. But you guys, I don't know, Keith, Eliav, anyone else with Sheldon? I know you must have been a Boy Scout. I have no doubt.
I can only tie Go ahead.
I can only tie a one-handed bowline. That's the only one I know. It's if you're hanging on a cliff, can they throw a rope to you? You're tied around your one-handed bowling. So when I do a bowling, I still have to do it one-handed because I can't do it otherwise. Go ahead, Sheldon.
Awesome. I was going to say, when I was over in Taiwan, I actually had learned the bowling when I was in Boy Scouts, but had forgotten a lot of it and everything. But I also, Jeff, I learned a left-handed bowling because Jeff Johnson taught me to fly, and he's left-handed. He taught me to tie the bowling over in Taiwan when we were over there for 3 months. And he would just pick at me every day because we were doing, stuff, and he'd say, tie it again, tie it again, tie it again. And so I do mine left-handed as well too, because that's how I learned from left-handed.
Yeah, fold it away from you. Rabbit comes out of the hole, around the tree, back in the hole, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't know that, you shouldn't be flying. They shouldn't even give you a certificate in my mind. You can't tie that because you're going to need it when you get stuck. You're going to need it to tie off. I mean, it's for sure.
I can tell you though.
Okay, so we're gonna do a quick fire here to finish it off here, and then we'll talk about next week's, which is gonna be really important. I like John Ross, not 3D on your iPhone. That's hilarious.
Is that an app?
Maybe helps you. Maybe terribly addicting app, but mainly just all I think about is, oh man, when my smart vent is all twisted up in knots, I'm like, I better get good at it at that point. So as far as quick fire here, just love to hear from each of you guys. We'll start off with Sheldon, and then we'll go Keith and Jeff. What's one thing that you used to do that you no longer do with ballooning because you learned? Or something interesting you learned lately that you didn't know?
That's a really tough one. I don't know, just kind of like what we're talking about with drop lines and stuff. I try not to use drop lines in high speed situations, even though the guy who taught me to fly used them all the time for super high speed stuff. And we've dragged people across fields, water skiing behind us and stuff. And I don't like to do that anymore, but that's one of the big things, and then also have a quick release for the drop line too. Speaking about this, so.
Yeah, same for me. It was tie offs, using a quick release as a tie off. I did that for years, and just a few years ago, I learned why that's a bad idea. So I've always struggled with that change, but made it probably 5 years ago and not looking back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll kind of just carry on. Sure, I'll carry on to what I'll carry on to what Keith said about tying off, and I think the larger the balloon, the more force there is, and so I've actually had some webbing harnesses made because each manufacturer has a like some kind of chart as to where you're supposed to tie off.
Yeah.
And if you're tying off from a single release, like a single point on your aircraft, I may or may not have ever tweaked a burner frame, and I'm not saying that I have or I haven't. I mean, there's no proof of that anywhere. There's no videos on this Fireside to say that I have or I haven't. But it is possible that can occur. If you're not aware that you can bend a burner frame, you can do it. So be aware if you're launching in wind, whatever your tie-off is, you can exceed the strength of your aircraft. So yeah, I mean, if maybe I were to have done that sometime, I would try to make a new method that would allow me to do that less in the future. And as I'm kidding about that, I think, again, as a pilot, I think we have a lot of personal responsibility to not make excuses for our stuff. Like obviously on here, Eliav, you're telling some story about you chasing balloons around, Sheldon and Keith were sharing stuff. And I think that's important, that we just kind of be open and say, hey, listen, you're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. And then actually figuring out what you did so that you can say, okay, I did that. It was really, really stupid. And I didn't know because no one told me, which is why I appreciate you doing these, Eliav. I've learned a ton of stuff from the different presenters you have, and I really have, because there are things I don't see. So I know I kind of went a little longer than I know that wasn't really a quick fire. But I do think that if we're brutally honest with ourselves and really, really looking in the mirror, and you don't have to do that on an open chat like this. I often call it confession, which is why I might call a guy like you, Eliav, or I have a couple of close friends that I know, aren't going to judge you for it. And they're going to say, well, and I always ask, my question is, what would you do differently? And how can you make it better?
What'd you learn?
I got one more for you. Yeah.
Sure.
I tell all new pilots that when they give them advice, when they first get their license and everything, I always tell them that don't ever pass up a good landing spot after 45 minutes. And one time I was flying in Vegas and I got becalmed and I had to land in a very small backyard, and it was not big enough for my balloon. Let's put it that way. And I had to fly on and fly on with just 2 people in the 310, three people in the 310. So not a good idea. But we looked back at my track later on, and I had passed up so many streets, and I didn't want to make the news, so I didn't land in those streets. But I easily could have landed in any of those streets. But you know, I always tell them, don't pass up a good landing spot after 45 minutes. You know, and you do it